Welcome, everybody. Welcome
Well
to
done.
ECAR's Minion-Sedit Community Organizing Know Your Ballot event. We are Minion-Sedit Community Organizing, and we are part of the larger ECAR community. Our goal is to make ECAR a 100% voting community, and our bigger work has to do with joining together and meeting up with other ECAR members and working to really make the world a better place, make our city a more just place. And so we're really thankful that you're here today. We do a lot of work all throughout the year. We hope you'll join us for some of our other community organizing events. But for tonight, we're really excited to welcome you to hopefully a lot of learning. I'd like to introduce our first guest, Julia Wick. She is a Metro reporter for the Los Angeles Times, covering City Hall and the 2022 Los Angeles mayoral election. She was part of the team that was a 2022 Pulitzer Prize finalist in breaking news for work covering a fatal shooting on the set of the film Rust. She was previously the editor-in-chief of LAist, and we're very delighted to welcome you, Julia, who she's going to walk us through part of the ballot. We will one note of business. We will be taking questions after Julia speaks. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. Please try to save your questions, but the chat will be monitored for questions once Julia is done sharing about the ballot. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And I see a lot of familiar faces, excited to be here. Before I start going through the races, I wanted to quickly touch on three kind of big factors that are affecting all of these races in different ways that are kind of important context to know. So the first and most explosive is, I don't know if any of you guys have followed the leak at City Hall in recent weeks, but that has obviously thrown kind of a massive unknown into the election in the last month of the election. And I spent a lot of time last week kind of talking to people at all parts of government and political strategists and about how they thought it would affect various races. And the kind of overriding things that no one really knows at this point, but the main thing I heard was that people think it's good for anti-establishment candidates just because there was already a lot of frustration with City Hall, but that tape has kind of intensified it. And in the down ballot races, those anti-establishment candidates are largely progressives, whereas in the mayoral race, Rick Caruso is sort of the unlikely anti-establishment candidate. Of course, there's another theory on how the tape will affect the mayoral race, which is that Bass has sort of positioned herself as a coalition builder, as someone who has made her life's work working on multiracial coalitions in the city. So by that theory, it actually is better for her, kind of makes her the right person for the moment. So that's one thing. And then sort of stemming from that, this is also a moment of real anti-incumbent sentiment in the city since far before the leak. And it's a really interesting shift in LA politics. For decades, being an incumbent in LA City Hall has basically offered you not total invincibility, but pretty close to it. It's historically been really hard to unseat an LA City Hall incumbent. Nithya Raman, city council member representing District 4, unseated an incumbent in 2020. Then we saw Eunice Hernandez unseat Gil Cedillo this June. And it's quite possible that another incumbent, Mitch O'Farrell, will be unseated in CD 13 in November. So that's kind of one thing to watch. And that's not at all unique to LA. We're in a moment where there's anti-incumbent sentiment really in a lot of parts of the country. And then the third kind of question mark and really interesting factor to me is the question of what the electorate is going to look like and what turnout will look like. So LA, for more than 100 years, had off-year city elections, meaning they were not synced up with state and national elections. We had reforms that went into effect in 2020 that moved our election year calendar to even years at the same time as state and national elections. It seems kind of small, but it fundamentally alters who shows up to vote in local elections. So for decades, LA city elections have been really low turnout affairs that were decided in a city that's majority minority where most people rent. City officials were chosen by an electorate that was whiter, wealthier, and older than the city at large. So that's kind of a pretty interesting disparity in terms of what the city looked like and who was voting. The kind of conventional wisdom around turnout in LA is that higher turnout elections tend to favor, or higher turnout elections have younger, more diverse electorate, which often, but doesn't always, favor progressive candidates. This is the first, so we had our first even year elections in 2020, but that obviously wasn't a mayoral race. So this is the first mayoral race we're having with kind of an electorate where no one really knows what it's going to look like. And then talking about the mayoral race, I know Stacy has some slides, I think. But they also just say the names of the candidates. So I don't know if we need them. I'm going to be pretty quick on the mayoral race just because I think that's one that everyone is pretty familiar with. Karen Bass, Rick Caruso. This race has in many ways been defined by Caruso's spending. He has now put in a little over 80, I believe current total is $86 million of his own money into the race. And that has just drastically altered what an LA mayoral election looks like in a way we really haven't seen before. He is on target to spend about $50 million in advertising, which is also unprecedented in an LA mayoral election. He has positioned himself as an outsider, a business person, and really kind of against the LA City Hall establishment, whereas Bass is much more of a progressive, longtime congressperson, deep ties to, came up as an organizer in LA, deep ties to various organizing groups in LA. And I can do questions on the mayoral at the end, but I'll just move through city since I feel like people have some sense of it. So let's do the city attorney's race next. And there are two other citywide races in LA, or two other citywide offices besides for the mayoral. One is the city attorney and one is the city controller. The city attorney's office is kind of a dual role. They handle the prosecution of all misdemeanor crimes in the city, but they also serve as the city's lawyer. So this means they defend the city in court, they advise the mayor, council, department heads on legal matters, but they're also responsible for writing municipal laws. If the city council votes to draft an ordinance, the city attorney's office are the people who actually write it. Faisal Gill is a civil rights attorney who has run somewhat substantially to the left of his opponent, Heidi Feldstein Soto. There are two of the main differences in their platforms. Gill has said he believes 4118, which is the city's pretty controversial anti-camping ordinance, is unconstitutional, whereas Feldstein Soto has said she'd work to standardize the uneven enforcement around 4118. I'm not going to get much more into 4118 because I feel like if you care about the person's position, you're probably familiar with what it is. Gill has also drawn flack from some corners for saying he'll institute a 100-day moratorium on new misdemeanor charges after taking office, with the goal being to have some time to regroup and focus on criminal justice reform. Criminal justice reform is sort of at the center of his campaign. He's walked that pledge back a bit since he first introduced it, saying he'll still prosecute egregious crimes like domestic battery and assault during that time period, which is not more minor ones, but it still caused something of a kerfuffle. And Karen Bass actually revoked her endorsement for Gill over that pledge after it became a campaign issue in the mayoral race. Feldstein Soto is endorsed by the LA County Democratic Party, whereas Gill is endorsed by some more progressive groups like Sunrise Movement, Ground Game LA, and LA Forward Action. Now onto the controller's race. This race is, like, to put it in really technical terms, totally bonkers and fascinating. The controller is the city's chief auditor and accountant. They approve city payments and are responsible for auditing city departments. It's a position that the average Angelino has likely never heard of, and it's become one of the buzziest races of the year, largely because of one candidate. That's Kenneth Mejia. He's a 31-year-old CPA and activist, who's running way to the left of his opponent, City Council member Paul Koretz. Mejia has put the controller's race on the map, largely through social media savvy, as well as billboards, kind of all around the city. You've probably seen them, that show how much of the city's budget is spent on police spending. He's also built a number of tools during the campaign to help Angelenos better understand local government. His opponent, Paul Koretz, whose name you probably recognize if you follow LA politics, because he's been in office for a while in various offices. He's finishing his third term in city council right now. Is a much more traditional candidate. He's a veteran politician, a longtime ally of the city's employee unions, and he supports more police spending. Mejia bested Koretz by almost 20 points in the primary, but he's also drawn some controversy. Activists associated with his campaign, including at least one who's on the campaign payroll, have disrupted mayoral debates and other public forums. And he's also taken some heat for some now deleted tweets, including ones that said Joe Biden was a racist and a rapist during the 2020 presidential election. And he said those tweets are not representative of what he would do as city controller. But that's kind of the bare bones on that race. And now on to City Council District 5, which I know both of these candidates have deep ties to ECAR. So I will try to tread very carefully. But it's safe to say that if you want a lawyer who's in their early 40s, who has young children, who spent part of their childhood living in Westwood, who has broadly similar views on a lot of issues, you're going to get your choice. These are two pretty similar candidates who both fit that bill, right down to even the profession and age. Both are Democrats. Differences are pretty similar. Katie Young-Yaroslavsky came within a hair of winning the seat outright in the primary. She finished with a little, just over a percentage shy of the 50% needed to not go to a runoff. So it's conceivably pretty hard for Yebri to come back to that, but you never know. And this race is considered somewhat competitive. Yaroslavsky is backed by the County Democratic Party, the County Federation of Labor, and Planned Parenthood. Yebri has the support of major business groups like the LA Chamber of Commerce, BizFed, the police and firefighter unions. And considered, a bit more conservative than her, but still a pretty standard Democrat, but just with, like police union support within that kind of somewhat narrow ideological spectrum of standard Democrats. But if you want some ideological fireworks, we can move on to Council District 11, where things get quite spicy. So this is a race with some actually sharp ideological differences. Aaron Darling, the progressive in the race, is a civil rights lawyer backed by many grassroots left-wing groups. His opponent, Tracy Park, is a former Republican who supported the failed bid to recall District Attorney George Gascon from office. She also supported the bid to recall Mike Bonnet from office. And this is Mike Bonnet's district, which he chose not to run for a third term in. And if I was going to break this race down in kind of the most simple terms, if you like Mike Bonnet, Aaron Darling is probably your guy. If you hate Mike Bonnet, Tracy Park is probably your girl. Like that's sort of the breakdown there. Darling is backed by the County Democratic Party. As I said, a bunch of grassroots groups. Park has the support of business groups, the police union. They both have various politicians, and they have pretty starkly different opinions on homelessness response and public safety. Darling would like to see less police spending. Park would like to see more police spending. Pretty divergent views on what homelessness response should look like. And now, on to Council District 13. Incumbent council member Mitch O'Farrell is facing a tough fight from challenger Hugo Soto Martinez. And this race is also an interesting illustration of the shifting yardstick of what it means to be a progressive Democrat in LA. Both candidates identify as progressives, but by very different definitions of the word. Soto Martinez is a longtime union organizer, and he's part of a growing grassroots progressive movement in the city that's gained pretty substantial power over the last 2 years, starting, echo on my end.
It's all right, Julia. You can continue.
Uh-oh, audio going in and out. Let me see. Is this better?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's part of a movement that's gained pretty substantial power in recent years, starting with Councilmember Rahman's election in 2020. Closely allied with the DSA and some other grassroots groups, along with Rahman, Councilmember-elect Hernandez, who unseated Gil Cedillo in CD1 in June, and of course, Aaron Darling. Broadly speaking, and I'm generalizing here and not getting into all of their policies, this group of candidates wants to see less police spending, a different approach to homelessness outreach and enforcement, and increased renter protections. And sort of the big question mark of the November election is how many of them will succeed and how big their block will be on council. Right now, it's a pretty small block. There's about 3 council members who identify as that faction of progressive or that breed of progressive. And should several of these challengers win, that could be, 5 council members, which is not 8 to have a majority, but it's enough to kind of work with other people and have a real influence on city policy. And then going to the next one, I don't think many people on here live in CD15, so I'll be pretty quick on this one. But Tim McCosker is definitely seen as the establishment candidate. He's worked around City Hall for many years, not recently, but in the past. Attorney and nonprofit executive, whereas Danielle and he's from San Pedro. So this district, which goes from Watts to San Pedro, has overwhelmingly been represented by San Pedroans, is that a word? People from San Pedro, despite, I believe, the majority of the population living in other parts of the district. And so Danielle Sandoval would change that balance. She is not from San Pedro. She would be, if not the first, one of the first Latinos to represent that district, and is definitely seen as a bit of an anti-establishment candidate. Her politics are a bit more all over the place. She's pretty progressive on some stuff, but then not exactly down the line. And she has had a bit of scandal recently. She had some issues with, I should have this in front of me to say it exactly because it's legal. So, but the Times, and by the way, I should say the LA Times endorsements are totally separate from the newsroom. We have no say in endorsements and they have no say in our coverage. But I mention this because it's rare when it happens. The LA Times revoked their endorsement for Sandoval because of a story that came out about some wage theft claims at the business she ran. And so that's kind of just some background there. But I think that's enough on CD15 because I don't think anyone here lives in CD15. Now on to the supervisors. State Senator Bob Hertzberg and West Hollywood Council Member Lindsay Horvath are both competing to replace Sheila Kuehl on the Board of Supervisors. I feel like the ECAR audience probably already knows about just how much power the Board of Supervisors wields, but it's pretty wild. This is a relatively under the radar governing body with 5 members that governs a county of 10 million people and oversees a budget of tens of billions of dollars. So an enormous amount of power. They've historically been known as the 5 Little Kings because of the fact they've historically been male and for how much power they wield, although the board is currently all female. So I guess the 5 Little Queens. And Horvath is backed by 4 of the 5 current supervisors, including Kuehl, as well as LA Mayor Eric Garcetti. Hertzberg is endorsed by Governor Newsom and Senator Alex Padilla. And one thing that's interesting is this has historically been a pretty liberal district, but it changed a bit in redistricting and took in some more conservative relatively conservative communities in the Valley. So that may play out in an interesting way in terms of what the electorate looks like there. Now onto the sheriff's race. Some quick background here. Incumbent Sheriff Villanueva wooed liberals in 2018 with a promise to kick immigration agents out of the LA County jails, a strategy that helped him achieve a giant upset victory over the then incumbent. That 2018 election marked the first time a challenger had unseated an incumbent LA sheriff in more than a century. Oh, is the sound still bad? Do you want me to turn off my video? I can do
The
that.
sound has been a little iffy, Julia. Maybe we
Oh,
should
no.
try. Yeah,
Is that better?
let's try it.
I'm so sorry. So that 2018 election marked and someone let me know if it gets bad again and I can try something else. That 2018 election marked the first time a challenger had unseated an incumbent LA sheriff in more than a century. Very different time. That was before Villanueva had sort of a Law and Order Fox News rebrand, and he no longer has the support of liberal Democrats. The sheriff's department is one of the more controversial departments in LA, and that's saying something. And those controversies are legion, and I'm sure we are running out of time. So suffice it to say, very controversial figure. He has been criticized for toxic relationships with other county leaders, as well as his hiring decisions and resistance to oversight, among other things. His opponent is retired Long Beach Police Chief Robert Luna, a lesser known figure, and the race has to some degree been a referendum on Villanueva's tenure. Polling has shown a pretty clear partisan divide in this race. Luna is favored strongly by liberals and Democrats, whereas Villanueva is more popular among conservative and Republican voters. And that's it.
Julia, thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.
We're going to open it up for questions now. And given the number of people we have, I'm going to ask that people put your questions in the chat, and I will go through the questions and pull questions out and try to, and then I'll ask them of Julia, and we'll go from there, and we'll get as much time in as we can. So let's see. Here's a question about the Horvath and Hertzberg race. Can you, Julie, could you say more about the differences between them beyond their endorsements?
Yeah, Horvath is definitely seen as a bit more liberal in a couple of different venues. She also, one critique Hertzberg has made of her is that she doesn't have as much experience. He was elected to the state assembly the same year she started high school. So he is a veteran politician. She has been on West Hollywood City Council and also served as West Hollywood's mayor, but West Hollywood is a relatively small city. He's also had a couple of controversies as well. He was known as Huggy Bear in the state assembly for some issues with hugging. And what else about that race? He was also she's seen generally as more liberal, though he's been a real champion for bail reform. Is one interesting thing about Hertzberg. It's kind of, I feel like, the super broad strokes of it. But if you Google LA Times and District 3 and the name Andrew Campa, one of my colleagues wrote a pretty detailed guide to that race that might have even more specifics.
Thank you. And then, yeah, we have a question here about the District 13 race. So can you just go back and a little bit deeper on the CD 13 race?
Yeah. Is there a specific?
No, not here in the chat right now. I think the question is for folks who are trying to make a decision, if you can elaborate beyond the endorsements about some of the differences between the candidates, perhaps about their experience or about their positions on current issues before the council.
Yeah, one thing that's been pretty controversial in that district, I'd say one of the kind of issues that has at least dominated attention in the race was how incumbent councilmember O'Farrell cleared the homeless encampment in Echo Park with a large police response. That was a pretty galvanizing force, I think, with quite a few challengers getting into the race and building support. And so there's quite a bit of controversy around that. O'Farrell has been in council for 2 terms. He worked for Garcetti before that. Interestingly, he actually came into council as sort of an anti-establishment candidate who was not expected to prevail in his race. And that's sort of, I feel like, the cyclical nature of things is you come in that way and then you end up challenged by an anti-establishment challenger. He was the acting council president for about a week after Nuri Martinez resigned, and so was really in the center of the kind of crisis at council, and was praised by a lot of people for offering a pretty steady hand during that difficult moment and keeping council business somewhat moving.
Thank you. So, and just since we had a question about that, I just want to reiterate that the candidates in that race are Mitch O'Farrell and it's Hugo
Soto Martinez.
Thank you, Soto Martinez.
Yeah, so O'Farrell is kind of seen as a more traditional liberal Democrat, more allied with kind of the current council makeup, and Hugo Soto Martinez is part of a group of challengers who are trying to move council pretty substantially to the left on police funding, on renter protections, and on homelessness enforcement in the way it's done.
Thank you, Julia. So I want to jump back to the Hertzberg-Horvath race because we have some questions here about flyers that people are getting in the mail. And I think this is one that people don't really know as much about, even though it's so important.
I actually cover city, not county, so I have like a broad understanding of the supervisor's race, but I'm probably not able to answer like nitty-gritty specifics there. Let me take a look in the chat.
Fair enough. So I'll just ask you to take a stab at it, and if you don't want to, that's okay. You can take a pass, and maybe we can discuss it a little bit more amongst our group. But the questions are about the mailers people are getting, and particularly claims in the mailers that that Horvath is a former Republican and opposes abortion rights, even though she's endorsed by Planned Parenthood. Do you know anything about what her background is and what the truth is in any of those mailers?
I know that she's endorsed by Planned Parenthood. I am not sure if she's a former Republican or not. I can certainly look that up and let you know.
Great, thank you. All right. Okay. So, and here's a question now back to the city. So you sort of talked a lot about how Yebri and Yaroslavsky are very similar. Can you say more about what differences might be in their approaches to, particularly in regard to the issue of homelessness in the city?
Yes, let me actually pull it up because I actually wrote about this. So broadly speaking, both candidates would prioritize prevention with strategies to prevent tenants from falling into homelessness and create more affordable housing, while also working to get people off the streets faster. Both candidates say they would have voted to pass 4118, the anti-camping ordinance, but the biggest difference is their opinions on its use, which are slightly different. Yaroslavsky has said she thinks 4118, which bans encampments in certain areas, should be used as, quote, a backstop strategy, paired with and following meaningful engagement and offers of services and housing. So basically like something that's in the toolbox, but not what they're reaching for first. She said that to do otherwise would just move people around, shifting the issue a few hundred feet away and, quote, increasing people's misery, is how she referred to it during a recent debate. Yebri said in a recent interview that anti-camping ordinances should be used, quote, robustly, and he is not Yaroslavsky for waffling a bit on how 4118 should be used throughout the course of the campaign. So I think that's the kind of clearest difference in their homelessness policy, but overall it is pretty similar.
Thank you. Okay, and a question from Jody. Can you explain the differences between Park and Darling on homelessness? So a similar question in that West Side district.
You know, I have not covered that race directly, so I don't know the nitty gritty of their policy. I know Park wants to see enforcement tools wielded more heavily, and Darling does not, but I unfortunately can't kind of speak to the nitty-gritty of it. I'm sorry.
All right. And here's a question I'm just looking at. So a question about sort of what your sense is of the impact of Caruso's spending in this race.
So that's, yeah, I'm looking at this one. This is a really interesting question about the Get Out the Vote campaign. Caruso is currently running the biggest field campaign we've ever seen in an LA candidate race. They've spent more than $10 million just on their field Get Out the Vote effort. And that's as of September. So the number has probably gone up substantially by now. What they are banking on is they're trying to get voters who typically are less likely to vote to show up and vote. And particularly Latino and Asian voters is where they've focused their resources pretty heavily. A couple of things are interesting about the strategy. One is that people are getting targeted, getting door knocked multiple times, who have never had basically any campaign knocking on their door. So it'll be really interesting to see how far that goes. But it's also really difficult to get people who, maybe have voted in an LA mayoral election in the past once or twice, but didn't vote in the primary. It's hard to get people who aren't regular voters to come out and vote. So there's a lot of question marks around how effective that strategy will be. It's also an interesting strategy because, as I kind of mentioned at the top, the conventional wisdom in LA has been higher turnout and a more diverse electorate tends to favor progressives. But Caruso is really banking on a different idea, which is that particularly among the Latino vote and people who are concerned about public safety, about policing, about homelessness, that these voters will end up coming out for him if they do come out to vote.
Really interesting.
But the thing I would say about that is it's a tricky one to kind of also just predict, because we've never seen this kind of field in LA in a local race like this ever at all. And so there's no kind of yardstick. And there's also another kind of conventional wisdom, thing in politics is that you can only go so far with paid field. That volunteer field tends to be much more effective because people really care if they're knocking your door and they really care. So there are questions about like what the ceiling is on what you're getting out of that money, but it will certainly have some effect.
Yeah, so my own personal data point on that is I got a Rick Caruso knocker on my door just the other day, who didn't seem deeply committed to the cause. So I don't know what that's worth. Julia, can you, are people in your newsroom or around the city that you're aware of talking about comparisons about the Rick Caruso investment in this race to other instances when very wealthy candidates have put their own money into races? I know you said that this is unprecedented in a local race in Los Angeles, but there are precedents, right, in the state, certainly.
Absolutely, yeah. Bloomberg would be the clearest precedent, who put about $75 million, I think, into his first New York mayoral race. And the next one was 80 or 90, and then the final term was over 100. But again, those are like, dollars from 10, 15 years ago. So much higher now, probably with inflation. That would be the closest precedent in general. There's also a lot of candidates who've been unsuccessful at the state level, putting in a lot of money, Al Checky going back a ways for governor, or more recently, Meg Whitman, who also poured in a huge amount of money and her campaign was unsuccessful. The closest precedent for LA would be Richard Riordan's 1993 campaign, which he spent about $6 million on. So pocket change for the Caruso campaign, and even with inflation, that would be like $13 to $15 million, depending on where you're looking. So it's not really comparable, but that's the kind of clearest example we have of, and he was successful, of course, in 1983.
All right. So seeing no more new questions in the chat, unless there's any last ones that people want to get in there, I'm going to begin saying thank you to you, Julia, again, for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you for having me.
to have you in the community and with us doing this, helping us in this important civic education work. It's a vital part of what we think of as ECAR and the mission that we serve for our folks, and the mission that our community organizing team serves and takes so seriously, is that we see it as our responsibility to help our community fulfill our commitment to be a 100% voting community, and that means being informed voters. So we're grateful to you for doing that and for helping us get educated and informed, and of course for the work you're doing educating and informing our city as a whole about everything that's going on at the city level, and reminding us how important that is. You know, we're going to move into the next section of our presentation in just a bit. So Julia, I know that you are probably on deadline for yet another story. So if you need to leave us, we understand. We just want to say thank you again for being with us. Yeah, as I see, Julia's very kindly sharing her email address here. So she'll do her best to get back to you, understanding that, that there's quite a bit happening at the city level right now. So thank you, Julia. And I just now want to turn in just a minute. We're going to go through. I just want to share with you what the rest of the agenda is for this evening. We're going to have a brief presentation about how to find information on voting for judges, which is a topic that I know many people find deeply bewildering. And here we are, you know, expected to know who to vote for judge. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute now with Scott Johnson. And then we're going to go through all of the state ballot propositions and talk a little bit about also the county and the city propositions as well. Actually, sorry, in the reverse order. So we're going to do city, then county, and then state. And so I'm going to ask you to hold your questions for all of those until the end of the presentation, and then we'll have time for discussion about those. When we do those presentations, they're going to be presented by members of our team. So you'll hear from us about all of the propositions, including both the ones that we have endorsed on, and we will let you know which ones those are and how we endorsed on them, and the ones we haven't endorsed on, where we'll share the information in a way that's you know, that's just sharing with you what the measures are on without telling you how to vote on them. We're encouraging you, I should say, to vote one way or another. So again, we're going to have Scott Johnson come and speak with us a little bit about the judges, and then we're going to go to Sam Bempong and to Tony Gittleson, who are going to share with us about the city, the county, and the state measures, and then we'll have some more conversation at the end. And before I let you go, before I move on to the next section, I just want to say to all these amazing folks who are here tonight, we are doing 2 more nights of phone banking. And so before we get off this call, I want to urge you to join us in making phone calls to the rest of our ECAR community members. We've got phone banking coming up. You'll hear more about it, but we really need your help reaching the rest of the ECAR community and making sure that we all fulfill our commitment to be voters in this very important election, where we know that local elections matter so much. So with that, I'm going to ask Scott to just get ready to join us here. I want to share with you a little bit about Scott. Scott Johnson has been a member of ECAR almost since its inception. Scott was an active member of the Lima Dean Committee for many years and has pitched in with Minion Sedek when he can find the time. Scott's a New York City transplant to LA. He works in South Central LA as a public defender. He's a committed civil and human rights activist who believes strongly that we need to know the issues and engage in them directly as part of our responsibilities as citizens in a democracy. And I will also tell you that poor Scott has been suffering from and is recovering from COVID. So if he doesn't seem his full self, that is why. So Scott, if you would please come join us and share a little bit about the judges' races and how we can learn more about them.
Of course. Thanks, Brooke. Can everyone hear me? I get a thumbs up? All right. Thanks for having me wrap with you guys for a couple minutes. So yes, I have COVID. I'm on the mend. I also just cut myself shaving 20 minutes ago, so I'm kind of the walking wounded. But let me give you my take on how to make sense of this. And obviously, whatever I'm saying is just in my own personal capacity, and obviously not to endorse any of the candidates. So you confused? I mean, I'm confused, and I'm a lawyer, and I practice, and I actually know people who are running for these seats, because what do we get? We have like 3 things to figure out who to vote for. We get these flyers in the mail, which seem to be, when you look at them closely, you realize most of the people have paid to play, to be on these cards. So for judges, you see them, and maybe they list who they are. You get this from the state, you get this big booklet with everything that's on the ballot, and for both the appellate, intermediate courts, the 6 judicial districts around the state, and the state Supreme Court justices, they only stand for what we call retention elections. They're initially appointed by the governor and a committee, a judicial committee of the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, the Attorney General, and the presiding justice of the intermediate appellate courts for the state. So during gubernatorial years, when there's an election, they have to run for retention. It's a whole complicated thing. So I'm not into the weeds about that, because basically for you folks who are from here, who can remember a generation back when Roseburg and some of the more liberal justices on the Supreme Court were recalled because of their opposition to the death penalty, and they kept invalidating death sentences, which back then were coming out of LA County and the other counties at about one per week. It was a big controversy, and there was a statewide political blowback that turned into this kind of recall where people voted no. A new justice is appointed. And I was looking around this morning, and the only other thing I could find was this thing we get from the county. And it really doesn't tell you anything more than just give you a facsimile of the ballot. So you really have not much to work with. So what I'm going to suggest here is think about, what do you want from a judiciary? What do you want from that branch of government? You know, there's all this talk about the Supreme Court losing its legitimacy. So if this is a chance for you to participate in strengthening and legitimizing a court system, one of the co-equal branches of our state government, you think about diversity, you think about different perspectives. So you have to bring your own opinions on that. What's important to you? But what you can do, and Brooke and the Minion Senate folks have put together this great, compendium of all these different local voter guides. If you do a little deep dive and poke around and skim through some of them, you'll start to find a lot on the judiciary. Like I was looking through the Democratic Socialists of LA chapter here in LA, has very thoughtful analysis. Obviously, they're coming from a pretty left-leaning view, but they're still pointing out differences between the candidates. They're pointing out, certain, like there's, for example, 4 public defenders running as a team, as a block, called the Defenders of Justice. And I think what's really important is to think about, is this judiciary supposed to be just an extension of our legislative system, or should it be a check on that and a check on the executive? So we have over 400 Superior Court justices, trial court judges across LA County. This is a huge legal system here. And this election cycle, about a half dozen seats are being contested. Either a standing judge is being challenged, or the seat was not filled by the governor, because the governor has the authority to appoint people to fill on completed terms or the new seats created. So these seats are either open because someone retired and the governor didn't fill it, or someone's challenging a sitting judge. And a lot of you'll see there's a defense lawyer and a prosecutor. So do a little deeper dive, look at some of these guides, and think about, what do you want? And then try to figure out from who's running. And this is just a few of 400 seats. So it's a slow process. And every election cycle, there's going to be a few more seats that come up for re-election, or, for the next term. So I think it's really about asking yourself those kind of questions and educating yourself, instead of just going party line, or I want all prosecutors or all defense lawyers. Try to think about a mix and what you're comfortable with having. But overwhelmingly, we have traditionally been prosecutors. More and more defense lawyers are getting appointed, either private or public defenders. But we need civil lawyers. We need people with all kinds of experience, educators. So be open to that and try to do your homework by taking advantage of the hard work that people in Minion Senate have done, and Brooke and the folks in the office, to make that resource more available to us. And I think the other thing that makes a lot of sense is just, if you know a lawyer, chat with a couple and kind of get their take, because oftentimes we know the people who are running, so we can tell you more about, not just in a personal way, but just sort of say, this is their temperament, and kind of give you a sense of what it looks like. Because unless you've had a reason to be in the civil or the criminal courts, or jury duty, or as a litigant, or as a litigator, you don't really have much experience in this whole system. So I think it's good to just talk to some lawyers and see what they think, and sort of ask them for their advice. So I think it's just like a nice opportunity to think long-term for this election and each one to come. Oh, I'm going to learn more about these, because these are countywide seats. It's not just your little district. It's not just your, area of your neighborhood's, council president, or someone running for office for the city council or state assembly. So, I'm happy to field questions, but I just wanted to sort of, frame a way of thinking about it as you educate yourself, not just, again, for this election, but going forward. I think it's a thing to really think about long-term. Is our democracy is in flux, and many would agree, or I think it's a crisis. So to think about how can we strengthen and participate in our state level this year.
Scott, thank you so much.
Of course.
We're going to go to questions at the end after we do ballot propositions. So if you're able to stay with us and stick around, we'd love to have you. If not, I also understand that you haven't been well. So do what you need.
I'll turn off my screen and mute if I pass out. That'll respond. Call 911.
I will. All right. Take care, Scott. And so, folks, we're going to be sharing the spreadsheet that you just saw. We're going to be sharing that afterwards. So hang tight. We're going to send that out to you. So you don't have to scribble it all down right now. I want to go now to our ballot measure presentations. And gosh, I need a little help because I can't remember right now if it's Tony or
Yeah,
Sam.
it's me. I believe it's
Excellent.
Can
Tony,
you hear me?
please take it away.
You can hear me, Brooke? I'm good. Can you guys? Yeah. Oh, good. All right. So I'm using a headset, so I thought. Oh, listen, it's so heartening. I'm Tony Gittleson. I'm a co-chair on the Minnesota team. It's so great to see so many ECARites wanting to know their ballots, turning out, on what is it, a Tuesday night. Anyway, so I'm going to go through the city and the county ballots pretty quickly. And a big shout out to Scott Weissman, who is on location in Vancouver, who is very helpful putting this presentation together. I'll try to be really quick. So, and there are a lot of ballot propositions. LA City, we're looking at 4 measures. The first one I'll talk about is United to House LA. You've probably heard quite a bit about that because our ECAR strongly endorses this measure. ULA, United to House LA, will create a permanent source of funding for affordable housing and renter protections by levying a small tax on high-value properties sold in the city of Los Angeles. Of course, funding affordable housing is essential to addressing our housing and homelessness crisis, along with other essential measures that we're going to have to look at and get passed, including zoning reform and streamlining, but certainly funding is one critical leg of that stool. You've heard a lot about it, but here are some key bullet points. The properties sold in the city for over $5 million, which is quite high, will pay a one-time 4% point of sales tax, usually by the seller. Properties sold for over 10 million will pay a one-time 5.5% point of sales tax. That's over $10 million. This would impact only about 3% of property sales that would even hit the $5 million threshold. So you're talking about, expensive homes or commercial properties. Most property sales will be unimpacted. The tax is expected to generate approximately $875 million annually. The LA Times puts between 600 million and 1.1 billion, so quite a bit of money, annual funding. Consider, I forgot how much HHH was. 70% of the funds will go to building new affordable housing. And very importantly, 30% of the funds will go towards renter protections. And obviously keeping vulnerable low-income renters in their homes is another key towards preventing homelessness. So all around, this is a very good measure that enjoys broad support. In addition to ECAR, LA Times has endorsed it, LA Voice, our partners, LA Forward, Bend the Arc, and opposed are the LA Republican Party, the Orange County Register, and the Howard Jarvis Tax Foundation. So there's that. We'll go to questions afterwards. Next on the city props is Proposition LH, which is an authorization for additional low-income housing. ECAR has no endorsements, but unfortunately, the reason we have to vote on this is because of a racist 1950 constitutional amendment designed specifically to keep people of color out of white neighborhoods. That law, Article 34, requires cities to get voter approval before building low-income housing. Good news is that Article 34 is up for repeal in 2024, the 2024 election cycle. In the meantime, LA currently has the authority to build only 3,500 low-income units per council district, and 4 council districts are very close or at that cap. Proposition LH would allow up to 5,000 additional low-income units in each of the city's 15 council districts. It doesn't raise taxes or in any way generate the funding for those units, and it doesn't mandate them. It simply authorizes up to 75,000 more affordable units to be built. And given that the cities, we have our regional housing needs allocation, the RHNA, we're we need to build at least 460,000 new housing units over the next 8 years, 57% of which have to be affordable. We really do need this measure. If it doesn't pass, some homes for seniors, veterans, and families already in the pipeline would be forced not to get built. Endorsements come from LA Forward, the LA Times, and I didn't find much organized opposition to this. Moving on, Proposition SP is a parcel property tax for the parks and recreation facilities upgrades. ECAR has no endorsement on this. So on the face of this, this is a pretty appealing measure. It would enact a parcel tax of 8.4 cents per square foot on residential and commercial buildings in the city okay. Sorry, I thought I was getting a message. So it to fund park maintenance and upgrades. It's expected to generate about $227 million per year, and it would replace money allocated by Proposition K, which was passed in 1996 and which is set to expire in 2026. But here's the problem. Critics of the measure, and they're substantial, say this measure was hastily drafted and it doesn't clearly specify how the money is to be spent. Many also note that this measure purports to raise $6.8 billion over its lifespan, which happens to be the identical amount needed for the 2028 Olympics, which is not supposed to be funded by tax money. So it's arguably a backdoor measure to fund the Olympics. It doesn't have a lot of oversight. The supporters of the measure deny that. The LA Times in their editorial makes a compelling case that the city has time to, we have until 2026 to come up with a much better bill before 2026. Personally, speaking only for myself, I love anything that supports parks and outside recreation areas, but I do get the sense we could probably draft a better bill. In support of this is Father Greg Boyle of Homeboys, who I'm sure all of us have a lot of respect for, and the LA Democratic Party is also a yes. The LA Times is a no, again, calling it a hastily prepared blank check. Also, final city measure is the LA Community College Special District measure, Measure LA. Oh, sorry if I'm bouncing around. I'm on Measure LA. I guess you'll find it. Yeah, I'll let you find it while I go on. So this is another sizable bond measure. It's a pretty modest tax assessment on homeowners of about $88 to $157 per year, depending on your home's assessed value, which will finance upgrading infrastructure at public community colleges for a total of $5.3 billion in bonds, which is a big number. A yes vote allows the district to issue the bonds and levy the tax that will finance them. A no vote doesn't. A little background on the LA Community College District. It's 9 colleges and it's about 229,000 students. It's the largest community college district in the country. It's a blue-collar educational engine for the region. More than half of LACCD students are at or below the poverty line. More than 3/4 of its students are people of color. More than 2/3 of LACCD students are enrolled part-time, many of them juggling work and home responsibility. And LA Community Colleges, speaking from a personal perspective, are really a great educational resource. I know both of my kids took extension courses there in Mall High School. And as many of you probably know, especially those of you with kids, community colleges are a really great affordable gateway to a 4-year college degree. The bond will allow LACCD to address urgent repairs, removing asbestos, lead paint, generally upgrading all LACCD 9 campuses. One more factoid, which I should note, LACCD has taken out construction bonds in 2001, 2003, 2008, 2016, for a total of $9.6 billion for renovation and construction projects. And there is, I've read, about $1 billion remaining that has been designated, but it hasn't been spent. So it's in the pipeline. And there were some questions about oversight at the LACCD, but the consensus seems to be LACCD oversight is significantly improved. I won't tell. Leaving out my personal opinion, the LA Times is a yes. The Democratic Party is a yes. There's an organization, Knock LA, which is a kind of a grassroots journalist coalition, as I understand it. They're a no. Most of the no's appear to be libertarian groups who generally are opposed to public education, period, and anti-tax groups. I did look at some of their comments, and I personally wasn't very impressed. Moving on to the county, 2 measures. We'll start with County Measure A. There we are. which is the sheriff's oversight. This is a strong endorsement from ECAR, Minion Civic Organizing, and the board. Briefly, so most elected officials are subject to robust oversight, but the LA sheriff has for too long been ignoring any effective accountability review. In 2020, LA County voters approved Measure R, which ECAR supported, create the Sheriff Civilian Oversight Commission, but Sheriff Villanueva has defied multiple subpoenas from this commission and refused to be subject to any civilian oversight. Measure A would punish future sheriffs who defy the law and refuse to be accountable for misconduct. Measure A would allow the LA County Board of Supervisors to remove an elected sheriff for cause with a 4/5 vote of the supervisors. Measure A has broad support from the ACLU, Courage California, the LA, our partners at LA Voice, LA Times, Bend the Arc. The LA Republican Party is a no. I think, and finally, the Measure C, the cannabis sales in LA County. ECAR has no endorsement on this, but here's a little background. So Los Angeles City legalized the sale of cannabis and taxes those sales. We've done that, but the unincorporated cities of LA don't have legalized cannabis/pot sales. Those include Santa Clarita, Glendale, South Pasadena, and Palmdale. Voting yes allows the LA County Board of Supervisors to tax the sale of cannabis in those unincorporated areas and cities of Los Angeles County where black market pot is outselling legal pot. That's why the 4% tax is quite low. It could go up if the Board of Supervisors decides over time. So these legal pot shops that will be paying taxes can compete with the thriving black market. A yes vote allows the county to impose the taxes, no vote doesn't allow it. And I should make clear that even if this measure passes, it doesn't mean it automatically will legalize cannabis sales. It means that the Board of Supervisors can then take it up and decide what to do. It's supported by Democratic Socialists and the LA Times, and the coalition Knock LA is opposed. And that quickly is the state, it's county and city measures. Basta.
Amazing. Thank you, Tony. That was impressive. All right. We're going to hold questions for just a little bit longer and go to the state measures with Sam Bempong. And then after that, we'll have an opportunity for questions. So Sam, if you would please.
Hi, everybody. I am Sam Bempong. I'm one of the co-chairs, and I'm going to go through the state propositions. So you all kind of just give a synopsis and then I'll help answer questions. So we'll start with Prop 1. This prop is asking the voters if they want to enshrine the fundamental right to reproductive freedom in the California Constitution. ECAR is definitely a big endorsement on this. We're a yes vote. Please vote yes on State Proposition 1. We believe that decisions about a person's body and health belong in the hands of the individual. The reason that this is on the ballot is because, yes, currently abortion and contraceptive access is legal in California, but it's not explicitly protected in the Constitution. Given the Supreme Court's recent actions, there's a legitimate fear that a change in legal interpretation or a change in control of the state legislator could undermine those protections. The only way to ensure this doesn't happen would be to amend the state constitution through Prop 1. So again, ECAR endorses, yay, Prop 1. Okay, Props 26 and 27, I'm going to sort of talk about them together because they are interrelated. But I'll start with 26. 26 would allow tribal casinos and the state's 4 horse race tracks to offer in-person sports betting, and it would allow tribal casinos to start offering roulette and dice games. Support for mostly comes from Native tribes who argue that it will increase tribe self-sufficiency and draw more business to tribal casinos. Support against mainly comes from card rooms and non-tribal casinos. 27 is sort of the other version of this. It's basically they're fighting to see how we're going to regulate sports betting now that the Supreme Court's opened that up. So 27 would allow licensed tribes and gaming companies to offer mobile and online sports betting for adults 21 and older outside Native American tribal lands. Support for comes from gaming companies like FanDuel and DraftKings. Support against comes primarily from tribal casinos. If both sports betting initiatives pass, that's 26 and 27, they may both go into effect, but it is more likely that a court will decide which one will take precedent. Basically, in summary, Prop 26 allows for in-person, in real life sports betting and is supported by the tribes. Prop 27 is for online sports betting and is supported by FanDuel and DraftKings and other large companies like that. So that's that. Moving right along, we'll go into Prop 28, which is funding arts and music education. Prop 28 would require the state to allocate at least 1% of money already guaranteed for public schools and community colleges to be set aside for music and arts education. It ends up being about a $1 billion annual set aside. Schools with higher proportions of students from low-income household would get more funding. Support for comes primarily from educators and teachers federations. As of the fall, no one individual or organization has spent any money to oppose the measure. So that's 28. Prop 29, it's back. Yes, dialysis is back on our ballots. It's, I think, the third time now. 29 would impose new regulations on kidney dialysis clinics, including staffing and reporting requirements. The measure also prohibits clinics from closing or reducing services without state approval and from refusing treatment to people based on their insurance type, which I think is important. Support for comes primarily from health workers unions, CIU, UHW, and the Democratic Party. Support against comes primarily from dialysis companies, DaVita and Fresenius. I hope I said that right. Probably didn't. So that's that. That's 29. Prop 30 is a tax to fund climate change. It basically would impose a 1.75% personal income tax on every dollar earned that's above $2 million annual. So not on anything under 2 million, just over. The funds raised would subsidize zero emission vehicles and fund wildlife response and prevention. It's backed by environmentalists and public health groups and is funded largely by Lyft, who would benefit, but so would anyone else who wants to see infrastructure for and subsidies for zero emission vehicles go into effect. Support against comes primarily from the California Republican Party and Governor Gavin Newsom, who is worried of it reeking of special interests giveaways. And that's 30. Prop 31, flavored tobacco ban referendum. So this isn't a proposition, this is actually a referendum, but it's labeled as a proposition. It's to decide whether to overturn a 2020 law that prohibits the sale of flavored tobacco products. A yes vote upholds the current law. A no vote would strike down the law and allow the sale of flavored tobacco products. Support for comes primarily from the tobacco industry, and support against is primarily from public health groups. And those are the state props.
Sam, thank you so much. I want to go back to that last one and just make sure we understood you correctly. So on 31, can we just pull that slide up one more time? I'm hoping Sarah can grab that slide. Oh, thank you, Sarah. We'll just take a second. So Sam, I think I heard you say at the end there, so a yes vote upholds the current law, which maintains a ban on flavored tobacco sales.
Correct.
And a no vote strikes down that law and then allows the sale of flavored tobacco. So I think we maybe reversed the endorsers. So
sorry.
So the tobacco industry is a no vote on this.
No, the support, no, if you vote yes on it, we're overturning the law. So as it currently stands, it's a little confusing, and that's why.
Good, I'm glad we're going over it.
Yeah, as it stands in 2020, there was a law that banned flavored tobacco, and the tobacco industry is upset about that law and has lobbied for the ballot for us to do a referendum on if that law should stand. So if you vote against the referendum, the 2020 law stays in effect. Or maybe I did write this wrong because now I'm reading it again. I'm so sorry. Hold on one second. I'll tell you in 20 seconds if I'm out of my mind or not.
We're going to come back to it.
Yeah, let me just look it up. I'm pretty sure that's correct, but I might have reversed them.
Give us a minute, folks.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Janet is just confirming on 31, voting yes.
It upholds the current law.
Is voting no on flavored cigarettes.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Okay. I'm looking right now. A yes vote upholds the current law. A no vote would strike down the law and allow for the sale of flavored tobacco products. So yes, if you don't want there to be sale of flavored tobacco products, and no, if you do want that. Apologies for the confusion.
It is confusing and designed to confuse. So
It is
okay,
designed to confuse. That is
we're
accurate.
demonstrating that right now. eCard does not have a position, doesn't have a position. And we haven't
Correct.
done an endorsement on 31. And Stacy is posting really good links to really excellent explainers on Cal Matters. So for anything that we have not explained to your satisfaction, we highly encourage you to go check out these explainers on Cal Matters, including the one that Stacy just posted. Okay, so now we're going to open it up for some questions. I see Cheryl again on the unless we said we endorsed on something, we don't have a position on it. So eCard does not have a formal position on propositions 26 and 27. Are there other questions that people would like to discuss about the city, the county, or the state propositions? I know we've covered a lot. Len is asking about West Hollywood residents. We don't have great information on West Hollywood, although I do recommend taking a look and seeing what's available on possibly knock.la might have some more information on West Hollywood, just endorsements. That's a very progressive group, but you can take that for what it's worth.
Would
Yeah.
LAS had a good?
LAS might have some coverage on West Hollywood as well. Yeah. Let's see. Janet is asking about United has LA funds. How will they be administered, current agency or new agency? So I was just looking briefly at this again, Janet, trying to answer your question. It will be administered through the city, but there is an oversight commission that is not appointed by any elected officials. And it's designed to include some people with lived experience with houselessness as part of it. So that measure was really written by advocates and activists who I think have learned quite a bit from some of the past measures that we've passed and the various oversight mechanisms we've had. And they crafted this measure very deliberately to make sure that there was strong oversight for it. Okay, I see
Thanks,
Jay
Brooke.
is asking, oh, you're welcome.
That's a good explanation. Thank you, Brooke.
So Jay is asking, does Prop 27 provide dedicated money for homelessness? And if so, how much? Sam, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that and feel comfortable answering that question.
Sorry.
gotta
Yes,
unmute.
I can't give you exact numbers, but essentially the main difference in the set asides for Prop 27, which is the one that allows for online, not in real life sports betting. There is the money raised from that. I can't remember the exact percentage, but it does primarily carve out for homelessness, which is how they're mostly targeting voters to say, if you want to deal with homelessness, let there be online sports voting. The 26, which is what the tribal casinos would prefer, which makes the sports betting have to be in person and actually go onto tribal lands to do that. They have set asides for mental health, education, and other various things, and Props ULH and other state measures focus primarily on homelessness. So they go into different funds, but they're both have set asides to fund public programs. But yes, 27 primarily provides homelessness funding, but there are a lot of progressive groups who feel that there are better ways to get homelessness funding and that it actually would be giving a lot of money to and power in the betting industry to groups like FanDuel and DraftKings and away from the tribe. So it's really, eCard doesn't have a position on this. So I hope that answers your question, and you can message me if you have more questions. I also really recommend what Stacy put in the chat, Cal Matters, where you can get a lot of information, as well as the spreadsheet we'll be sharing will tell you different organizations' views. So you can get a rounder, a more clear look at who's supporting what.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And yeah, we're going to share the endorsement spreadsheet after the meeting as well, so people can take a look at all of the endorsements we've collected in a spreadsheet format. I want to try to get to the question about LIFT. What does LIFT get out of Prop 30? So LIFT is bankrolling Prop 30. What's been said about that is that it's not just that they want people to switch to electric cars. It's that in fact the state has mandated that all of those types of rides, that some very high percentage of them be in electric vehicles by a certain point. And so they will
It's 90% of their miles have to be in electric vehicles by 2030.
Thank you.
So yes,
And so-
they're financially benefiting from the bolstered infrastructure and the rebates, but so is anyone else who wants to benefit from the rebates of electric cars. So I don't mean to cut you off, Brooke, but if you want me to get into a little bit of the details on it, let me know. And if not, I'll let you take it.
No, I think that basically covered it. So just looking on
It's
here.
the breakdown of the numbers, just FYI, is it's about 4.5 billion annual that Prop 30 would generate. Most of that is going to go to rebates for people buying zero emission cars and to build more charging stations. Half of that will go to low and middle income residents who want to get rebates for low income calls and other incentives. A quarter is going to hire and train firefighters to fight California wildlife. Because there are going to be rebates on electric vehicles and Lyft is being mandated to switch to electric vehicles, they clearly benefit, but so does everyone else.
I would just add to that in addition to Gavin Newsom, also the California Teachers Association is strongly opposing Prop 30.
Yeah.
All right, and thank you. Stacy's also been posting some links in the chat to other organizations with more information. This is about the homelessness funding in Prop 27. All right, then I'm looking here. Janet's asking about federal infrastructure funds are paying. Okay, yes. So there is significant money right now flowing into building out infrastructure for electric vehicle charging stations. In part through the IRA, which we helped advocate for. So hooray.
Right, and that's why we should not be misled by Prop 30, because Prop 30 says they're building vehicle charging stations and it's being taken care of by federal money. So it's another one of their misleading things.
Okay, so Sarah, you're asking about why is Newsom opposing 30? So for all the reasons we were just talking about, Newsom is opposing Prop 30 because he thinks that that Lyft is bankrolling it so that they can avoid spending the money that they would have to spend to convert their own fleet to electric cars by getting that money out of tax funding. And he argues that federal dollars are paying for building out this electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and that the state, in addition to federal rebates for electric vehicles for low-income people, that the state is actually also rolling out programs to help low-income people buy electric vehicles. So his argument is we don't need this tax and this dedicated fund to do this, and this is in many ways a giveaway to Lyft, which comes on the heels of Lyft and Uber funding a ballot proposition a couple of years ago now that really allowed them to rewrite labor law in a way that was very beneficial to them. So I think there's also a concern that Lyft, among other corporations, is sort of seeing the potential for taking advantage of using their money in the ballot proposition process to really write legislation that benefits them in ways that are deceptive and confuse voters into thinking that they're voting for one thing when in addition to the thing they're voting for, they're also voting for things that are very beneficial for those companies' bottom lines. So I just also got a request, and I want to address this. Anita was asking that perhaps it would be helpful for folks to understand what the process is for ECAR to endorse ballot measures. I think that's important. So ECAR, it chooses ballot measures and propositions to endorse based on the community organizing team and the Green Action team and potentially other constituencies within the ECAR community coming forward and saying, you know, this is something we've looked at and we care about, and we think that this makes sense as part of ECAR's values. Then we together work that out, the leadership teams of each of those groups. We then bring it to Melissa, our CEO, and Rabbi Brass, our senior rabbi. And if we have their support, then we go to the board with it, and then we ask the board to vote on it. And so when we say that ECAR has endorsed something, that means it's been through that entire process of our leadership teams, our executive leadership, and our board all agreeing and voting to endorse a ballot proposition. So by the time we get there, we have a very wide breadth of ECAR leadership choosing to endorse something. We don't make endorsements on every ballot measure or proposition. There are so many that we couldn't possibly address them all, and they don't all fall within the purview of things that we are working on at any given time. So just because we didn't endorse doesn't mean we don't care about something. It just means that our leadership teams chose to focus on a smaller number of priorities at any given time so that we can be effective in our advocacy work. So I hope that's clear and helpful. All right, I'm just looking through the chat here. Yeah, there's some good background here on Prop 30 for folks who want to learn more. Ruth is asking about wildfire response. And do we think there's enough money going to that? I think that this is, these are the questions people are discussing as they look at this, and I would encourage you to take a look at some of the articles like the one that Stacy has posted. I think that
I can say that it's a quarter of the funds raised would go towards training and hiring and training firefighters. So that's the answer to that question. It's a quarter of the set aside.
All right. How are we doing? More questions? We're getting quieter. All right, so as we move towards wrapping up, I'm going to hand it over to Brianna in just a second to do a closing. But before we do that, I just want to say again that we're going to share the spreadsheet that you've seen us briefly share. We'll send it out by email. We'll also be posting that to the ECAR website and trying to get it out as broadly as possible to the community. And before I hand it over to Brianna, I just want to express just tremendous gratitude for our Minion-Sedgwick community organizing leadership team, who have put in a whole lot of work behind the scenes to make this event happen. As you can see, our folks have really gotten up to speed on these measures and done their research and their homework. They put together the beautiful spreadsheet that you're going to get to take advantage of and see. They've also done the organizing work over a long period of time now to get us to the place where we have the capacity to make informed endorsements and to try really hard to mobilize our community, not just to turn out and vote, but to turn out and vote in a smart and an educated and a consistent way. And so I really want to express my tremendous gratitude to the dedicated team of leaders that make all that stuff happen. And so with that, handing it over to you, Brianna.
All right. There's one more slide. Sarah, I don't know if you can still show that last slide, but basically, we want you all to get involved and stay involved. There is a mayoral forum tomorrow night. It's hosted by the ADL and the Jewish Federation. It's at 5 o'clock, and I'm going to put into the chat the link so you can register. There's also ECAR is doing, as you heard from Brooke. Oh gosh, I can't find it. Sorry. Hold on one second.
We can, Brianna, you keep talking. I'll get you the link for the.
Okay, great. Thank you. ECAR, get out the vote, virtual phone banks. We're doing 2 more, October 27th and November 1st. They're from 7 to 8 p.m. It's really fun because we're on Zoom together and we're only calling ECAR members and they welcome our phone calls. It's the best phone banking ever. Next Saturday, October 29th, after services, we're going to have an educated activist lunch and learn with the New York Times journalist Connor Doherty. He wrote this amazing book about homelessness called Golden Gates, and it's an incredible gift that he's going to come and speak to our community. And thanks to Anita and Cipra for suggesting this book. And then finally, of course, we want to remind you guys to vote. Please vote. You can also vote by mail or at a vote center before November 8th, but make sure that you do vote. Again, we will we'll send you guys the link to all the information that we shared tonight. And we really appreciate you coming. This work does not get done without every single person here. The ECAR community, we all depend on all of you to work together to make this city better, and it's holy work, and we're called to do it. We're called to build this beloved community. And so thank you all very much again for being here. And with that, we're gonna go out with some more Janelle Monáe.